mystery morning or magical midnight, wherever, whenever you may be, across the dimensions or around the vibrations. I'm Tillie Treadwell, and oh, have I got a show for you. Won't you join us on The Weird Walk Home? Or welcome back. I'm Tillie Treadwell with The Weird Walk Home, and today I have with me Mr. Mike Clelland. Mike is a returning guest, and he's quickly becoming one of my very favorites, truth be told. So, Mike, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing very well, doing good.
Lovely. I know that the last time that we spoke, we covered a mishmash of topics related to owls, and you told a lot of your own stories, and you got to hear some of mine. Today, I thought that maybe we could talk about something a little bit more exotic. However, before we jump into that, my dear, would you please tell us who you are and what you've been up to lately?
Well, so I've been doing owl research for the last 16 years or so. That's a long time. And
Mhm.
sometimes it feels like a full-time job. That's not quite true, but it feels like it's true sometimes. I've published 4 books, all of them with a theme of owls. And initially, when I started on this, it was the connection between owls and UFOs. And I know we talked about it when we spoke about a month ago, and it's not just owls and UFOs. Well, it's owls is the core, and then around that is a constellation of a few other what I would call highly charged human events. We can get into that a little bit more. So the part of it is UFOs, but it stretches over into other. Well, I'll just list them. Initially, when I started the research, because of my own direct experiences, I was looking at owls and their connection to UFO contact. And UFO contact would be a synonym for UFO abduction. I use that term all the time. I try to shy away from it. It's kind of a loaded term, right? Abduction is something that you abduct someone, you go to jail. It's against the law. So there's all kinds.
Right.
So contact is a little softer, but I'm saying the same thing essentially. Um, so there's 5 things I should be able to do this that are connected with owls according to my research. There might be many more. I'm simply not receiving them, and they're simply not showing up as a pattern in my research. Here's what is showing up as a pattern in my research: owls and UFO contact.
Mhm.
Undoubtedly, they are connected. Don't ask me how or why. I could guess at some ideas, but I wouldn't be able to give you a concrete answer. And then it would be meditation. People meditating will often see owls.
Mhm.
People going through shamanic initiation will often see owls.
Mhm.
People will see owls under the influence of psychedelics, most
Yes.
notably mushrooms, and death.
Mhm.
Owls and death. Now, all 5 of these things, I would argue, I would call they're transform or highly charged human experiences. And then if there's a thread that connects them, I would say that there's a transformative quality to each of them, right? So you take a psychedelic mushroom trip, you'll have a new insight into reality in a way that you would not have through normal waking consciousness. Death is obviously the ultimate transformation, and then meditation and shamanic initiation. That's a weird one. We talked a little bit about that before, the shamanic issues. Yeah.
Mhm.
So
And I
I've
would like
been,
to get more into that because,
oh
in
yeah,
my
yeah, yeah, yeah.
experience and opinion, it ties in very well with today's topic for us, which is owls and interdimensionality.
Yeah, it's so there's some stories I can tell where the owl is just like, oh, that's a screen memory. Like someone says, I was driving down the road and saw a 4 foot tall owl in the road, and then it disappeared, and all of a sudden I was back home, and it was should have been home at midnight, and I was home at 2 a.m.
Right,
That I would say is a screen memory. I can't say
right.
that concretely, but you hear that story 500 times, and you kind of like, oh, I see where that one's going.
Yes.
So, and other stories are people see real owls, right? They're walking down the street, there's an owl in a tree, it hoots, the dog sees it, their neighbor sees it, they're like, wow, that's a beautiful owl. And then 5 minutes later, someone sees a UFO.
Yes.
That I would say is a real owl. Now,
Mm-hmm.
then there's this blurry line in the middle where it gets super trippy. Oh, so I've done this before where I try to editorialize as little as possible, right? So someone tells me a story or I get three stories, I could go on and on and on and be really long-winded about what they have in common and what it might imply. And I feel much more comfortable backing off and just telling the story and
Yes.
letting that sit alone, right? So, like you tell a campfire story, it's got a little spooky quality to it. It's got a little mystery to it, and then at the end, you don't sit around the campfire and then analyze the campfire story. It's just meant to sit there and create a mood.
Right.
So I'm at the point now where I feel like it's a mistake to overanalyze these stories. You can do it a little bit. Your human nature is going to, but I cautiously try not to overanalyze them and just reflect on the mood. Here's so I can I just tell a story? This is a good one.
Oh, please. I love stories.
And hopefully I didn't tell this one before, but there's a woman. She's her name is Karis Melina Brown, and she has written some books, and she's got a YouTube channel, and she's a very open spokesperson about mystical issues, and she's got psychic abilities, and she does coaching and intuitive readings and things like that. So
Mhm.
she knew me. We had met, and she was going to go on a walk. This is in California, in a forest in California. And on the drive to that walk, she says, it's going to happen today. I'm going to meet an alien. I know it. I know I'm going to meet an alien. It's like,
Ooh.
I just have this vibe. I have this feeling I'm going to meet an alien. So she goes on the walk. She says
Mhm.
this really funny thing. She says, people on the walk she said they didn't see me. It was like they passed me on the trail and they wouldn't even look at me,
I've
which I
had
thought
that
was a
happen
funny,
many times. Hmm.
yeah. So I thought that was a funny detail. So she's on the walk and she's all of a sudden she's like, it's this kind of like, oh, I'll just step off the path. And she walks a little bit into the woods and then there's like, oh, I'll just sit on that rock. And she kind
Hmm.
of hears this voice in her head that says, oh, not here, like a little over to the left. Oh, not that far left, a little back. Oh, oh, yeah, right here. Yeah, right here. So she's sitting on this rock, having been led there. And then she kind of realizes that she's like, there's like this hill in front of her and there's bushes and trees. And there's kind of like this tunnel in the bushes that she's got this clear view that goes, and she's looking at a great horned owl. These eyes are staring back at her. Now she's a really open-minded researcher. At the time, she was doing fairy research into the fairies.
Hmm.
So that was all in the forefront of her mind. And she looked at this owl, and it's looking back at her. And she didn't know what she had the thought in her head: great horned owl, which is a very common form. It's a bigger owl, but it's a very common owl. It's not unusual to see that during the day. And she hears a voice in her head that says, or she asks in her mind. She says, "Are you an alien or are you a fairy?" And she gets back, "Why can't I be both? You're
Uh-huh.
both." So it says you're both to her, which I thought was a really poetic kind of answer. And then she and I spoke on a Skype call, and I have this call recorded. We talked for the next 45 minutes about just how trippy things got, how it felt like she just drifted in and out of this reality, how she was given downloads, how she was just thrust into this alternate realm. It was typical of these kinds of things. Someone is describing an alternate reality. It was hard for me to follow, but I could hear and feel the earnestness,
Right.
her sincerity.
Right.
So that story. So here I'm going to tell one more story. So
Sure.
so yeah. So there's one. She's describing entering another reality, looking at what might be a real owl, right? It's owl sized. It's not like a 5 foot tall owl or anything unusual like that. It's an owl. They lock eyes. They have this mystical experience. Um, Other dimensionality. She talked about being transported into a non-ordinary state of consciousness, whether that's ultimate, that's you're in mysterious territory trying to untangle that. But wow, was that a big story? Now, the guy John gets a hold of me, And I met John at a conference later. He said, Mike, I'm John. I had the story about hiking in Maine. John, let me get this correct. John was going on a hike, and he had the thought, oh, I'm going to see him today. I'm going to see an alien today. I'm going to see it. What's going to happen? I'm going to see an alien today. And then he literally was driving behind a car this is in Maine, and they have kind of dome granite peaks that you can hike up in a day and hike back down. And he was following a car, and the vanity plate on the car was "Today is the day."
I love that. That lines up perfectly with my own experiences as well.
Oh,
Oh,
here, well,
yes.
just so there's more to John's story. So,
Sure.
sorry, but so John goes on the hike. He's
Hmm.
walking up the trail, and there's an owl on a branch. And he stares
Nice.
at the owl, and it stares at him. And he says, like, the owl wasn't blinking. The owl was staring right at him.
Huh.
He wasn't blinking. And he said, like, oh, he said, I was in a staring contest with the owl. And it just went on and on and on and on and on. And he said, oh, the owl's going to win. Like, I can't do this. The owl's like gifted. The owl's going to win the staring contest. So
Oh,
he
yeah.
continued walking, and the owl like followed him as he walked. And he got up to the top of the peak. And when he got up to the peak, there were other people. There was other hikers up there. And they were all these people were like, what is that over there? As soon as he got up there, like, what is that? That light? And there was a floating light, what looked like on one of the mountain peaks nearby, like this floating dot of light. So
Hmm.
he said, "Oh, I'm going to see an alien today," and he saw an owl and a UFO. Karis went on a hike, said, "Oh, I'm going to see an alien today," and she had a owl and a well, she had an owl and like an interdimensional experience, and
Hmm.
then so John gets back to his house the next morning. He meditates regularly, gets up in the morning to meditate, and there's a great horned owl. There's an owl right out his window hooting, and the owl stayed there. Oh, I gotta be careful. Like for many days, every morning he would meditate, the owl would hoot while he was meditating. So, so this is the quality of the stories that I'm getting. Because I
Hmm.
mean, for me, so it's got the meditation aspect, which is right there. He saw a
Hmm.
UFO. It's right there. There's an owl connected to the story. It's right there. Um, the this entangled intention. It wasn't like they set out. It wasn't they said, I have an intention of seeing. I'm going to manifest seeing an alien today.
Yeah,
That's not what they said.
precisely.
They said, I think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So it was more like
Yeah.
like an intuitive knowing. So yeah,
Mhm.
so we get this stuff gets tangled up. So I don't have a good answer to what it is, but I certainly, for me, I am left with a mysterious mood trying to make sense of these stories.
Of course. Well, if I may, it does all tie in perfectly well together in my experience and opinion. And I have noticed that there seems to be interdimensionality involved with every single one of these encounters in several different ways. So, the way that I personally interpret dimensions and interdimensionality is that time is a dimension, vibration is a dimension, um, let's see, reality is another dimension, and these three can be affected all separately or they can be affected together, and it can blend in ways that maybe are less expected. So I have found that many people, human people, who report interactions with non-human people say that they are often being given information beforehand and that these non-human people are speaking to them, sometimes even in their own voices.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems as though they are just getting drops of awareness. However, I suspect that this is another type of dimension, that the non human person is entering into the dimension of that particular human person, the reality of that human person, in order to communicate in a less threatening manner and to prepare them for an experience that is to come. So I see it as an act of, in a lot of ways, kindness and mercy and preparation. And then the dimensionality aspect, these non-human people are bending or manipulating time, reality, and also ego too. So in my opinion, these are all incredibly interdimensional. And the fact that they can take a human person out of their body or out of this reality just adds even more of a fascinating layer to it for me. But what do you think about all that?
Well, that's the mystery. It shows up all the time. It shows up all the time. This weird time aspect, this
Yeah.
weird other world. Did I talk the last time about being between the magnets, the energy between the magnets?
No, no, you didn't. And I wanted to say you didn't share those two stories either, the ones that you just shared.
Oh, I got
So
lots of
all of
stories. I'm
this
not going to
time.
run out of stories. Yeah. So, yeah. So these are two that I've heard. These aren't in my files directly, but these are two that I've heard, and I've so this one guy who's had been was having a lot of contact experiences. Um, Jim Sparks. He went by the name of Jim Sparks. He's kind of fallen out of the field, but he wrote kind of a controversial book in
Okay.
the
What was the name
early
of
or
it?
late '90s. It's called The Keepers.
Oh,
And so he had a story, which this is interesting. Like, if he made this story up, which I don't think he did, if he made this story up, like it's like too, it's so like I don't think I would have made this story up. So I met him. He seems like a nice enough guy, so I'm not going to judge him or anything like that. But the book
right.
in the UFO field, like a couple of people pointed out some things, and I didn't whatever. So that's not the issue. But um, he was sitting on his couch, and he'd been having a lot of contact experiences. So he got up from the couch, and he went to the kitchen, and he opened the refrigerator, and he got a can of soda or pop, got a can of soda, and he opened it, and the noise it makes, that noise when you open a can, it made that noise, and he walks back in and he sat down on the couch. And then he's sitting on the couch and he's like, whoa, oh, here it's happening. Like he knew, he could feel the sensation, like, oh, I'm going to get taken. It's going to happen right now. Whoosh, he gets taken. He's in this, like, he has the whole experience of being on board the craft, and he had these kind of school type experiences on board the craft where he was being taught these classes and was looking at like a view screen and was having these downloads. So he had these kind of classroom type experiences on the craft. And then all of a sudden, he's back in his couch, and he's sitting there like, whew. And then he hears in the kitchen, he hears this, the noise of someone opening a can, and he sees himself walk out of the kitchen
Uh,
into the living room, walk right up to him. He's seeing himself, so himself comes and walks right up to him and sits down in place and kind of sits
mhm.
back into him. So this, if he was on the craft for, let's say, an
Yeah.
hour, 2 hours, like they put him back,
Mhm.
like how, like wow, like what happened there? Like that would be that's a really, I'm going to use the term sophisticated story. You have to kind of, like, that story seems outlandish unless you've really paid attention to the richness of the phenomena. So that's one that has just that time aspect that just leaves me. It's, how to say it. I keep on going back to the story. I've been on this kick lately where the story I feel is more important. Like I could analyze this story for a half hour. It wouldn't do any good. Either you're going to feel the mood of the story or you aren't. And so that's where I'm at this point. So,
I hear you on that. Absolutely. And I personally am prone to believe that person's story because I've had
oh
similar
yeah.
experiences. And the classroom dimension seems to be quite a popular motif. Even
Mm.
myself, I've had those exact experiences where I'm going to a classroom and I'm learning about a lot of things to bring back here to Earth. And I've heard several other stories
Oh
almost
yeah.
identical to my own. And so I've come to believe that we are here. We have this dimension right here and right now on Earth. We have a higher one where is the classroom. And then it seems to me that then there is possibly the quantum dimension, which that may blend into that classroom dimension more. I'm not entirely sure. and then we have the soul dimension from which we all come. That's my current understanding
Mhm.
from my experiences. But what that guy is saying, I think is perfectly valid. And I think that it encompasses all of the different dimensions and maybe even possibilities of such in one story, an entertaining one too, I
Oh yeah,
find.
yeah. Yeah, there's no owl in that story, but that is a good story. So here's another one that doesn't have an owl in it, but it does sort of speak to this strange time dimension thing. And this was just a story I read in a book, and
Okay.
came from what I consider credible researchers. So uh, I think it was Boy Scouts, like a Boy Scout camp out. So a bunch of boys all camping out, and teenagers, and they're in
Mhm.
the woods and they're camping out, and the one boy's like kind of a rebel, and he goes to smoke a cigarette. So he like walks off into the woods, and he lights a cigarette, and he's in this meadow, and this as he lights a cigarette, this like flying saucer lands, and the
Oh no.
beings come out and take him on board. And then he's like has the long experience of being on the craft and all these things happening, and then he's returned, and then he's standing. He said he was standing behind like a little hill to hide. So he's behind this hill, and he's standing behind the hill, and he's got the cigarette, and the cigarette hasn't burned down.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's essentially the same thing. So something other has happened. All kinds of stories about people having, like, men having beard growth. They're gone for an hour, and then they wake up in the morning, and the wife is like your beard. It's like it's you got a week's worth of beard growth. You shaved yesterday. How did that
Yeah.
happen? So there's all kinds of these stories that where it defies that simple time logic. And as far as the school thing, it's very interesting because like channeled material or spiritual teachers and will say Earth is a school,
Hmm.
like our time on Earth is a school, and I can follow that logic. And do you know who
Sure.
Leo Sprinkle was? He was a professor of psychology at the University of Wyoming. He was a doctor. He had a doctorate. He wasn't a medical doctor, but he died a couple years ago. But he wrote a book
Oh,
called Soul Samples, and he reflected. He was very much. He was a teacher, so he saw the whole phenomena as a school type environment, as a teaching environment. And that's, like someone will have a heavy Christian bend, like Christopher Bledsoe, and he'll see it through the lens of Christianity. Other person will have
yes.
um, so I think, like, well, I feel like I'm a creative type, so I'm seeing this phenomena as as a as a stage play, as a movie, as a
Yeah.
story, right? So and I'm predisposed to do that because of my creative mindset, and I
Sure.
recognize that. But still, it's a good fit, and I think we need to wrestle with these ideas that way. And then there was one more little thing I was going to say. Anyway, well, keep going. It'll pop up again.
Oh no, that's all right. The very first story that you told, though, what was the lady's name?
Caris Melina Brown, and Caris is spelled Charis, and it might be
Okay.
just she sometimes goes by Caris Brown or Caris Melina Brown. So,
Okay. Well, Karis's story was especially of interest to me because it seems to me that almost every aspect of what I would consider to be a healthy, positive encounter was present. And then you have the owl on top of it. And what interests me, I think, the most is that apparently this non-human person told her, well, what does it really matter what I am? And you are that too. And I just that made me happy because I see everyone as being family anyways. And so I think that human people are so very caught up in labels most of the time that it's really hindering to building relationships and harmony and empathy and understanding to other people who may be around them. And I find that kind of sad. So to hear that poetic disruption of such logic by that non-human person, that adds another dimension of beauty to the storyline.
oh
um,
yeah,
I find that really interesting because every non-human person that I've ever encountered has said that they avoid human people mostly because of how judgmental and closed-minded most are towards people who are not like them. And yeah, I can absolutely see that. But anyway,
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I know someone who woke up and or had like was lying in bed and just looked over and there was like a 9 foot tall, like it was taller than the ceiling. He had to hunch down to stand in his
yeah,
room, like a 9 foot tall praying mantis in his room. And I could see like having an emotional reaction to that if I woke up to that. So, but I do know what you're saying. And then there's this kind of universal theme that runs through this not only UFO contact experience, but some world religions and some channeled, certainly a lot of channeled material, and some kind of mystical teachings of that. We are all one. And you,
yes,
you get right down to even someone like like a just an astronomer or a physicist. We are if we have the model of the Big Bang, everything existed as one block of matter. That block of matter expanded, and these whatever little particles, like we're all made of the same stuff as that initial ball of matter. So there's a rich complexity and a rich diversity of, not just personalities, but flowers and planets and lights and colors and everything. And so, yeah, that diversity shows up in the UFO lore. That really bothers some people who are outside. They say, well, why are there so many things? There's light beings, there's mantis beings, there's little grays, there's people who seem to look just like us. There's, reptilians. And so, they want it to be all nice and tidy, but the
right,
phenomena itself is a mess. Like it's all over the map as far as trying to, and then I've said this many times, I feel blessed that I've been given the owl thing because I don't have to worry about the big mess. I can just pull on the one little
yeah.
thread of the owls and then see where that leads me. So
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's all beautiful and I love it, but I understand that the human ego can only handle so much. And that's okay. I hope that over time maybe people here can be a little bit more open-minded towards these types of people because I do know, at least I think I do from my own experience. And again, don't listen to me probably. I'm just a chick in pajamas in front of a Christmas tree talking nonsense maybe. So don't listen to me probably. Okay, so since that disclaimer is over, um, I hope that more harmony can develop over time with human people and non-human people because many of the, well, no, actually, all of the non-human people that I've ever met, whether they are so-called like parasitic or demons or so-called angels and fairies, hybrids, all of them, even the mantis people, the reptilians that I've met, everyone and everything say that they would like to um, be be more of a family with the human people, but that the human judgment and the human boundaries prevent them from coming and talking a lot of the time to human people because they don't want to, or they biologically cannot disrespect the human wishes. And I think that that's perfectly fine and viable. I just, people here say that they want more magic and they want to meet the non-human people. Well, maybe this is the way to do it, you know?
mhm. Yeah, and I mean it's shattering. It shatters your paradigm. Like we live in
Yeah.
this world we have. It's kind of nice to live in a, like you want your nest to be nice and tidy and
Yes. Yeah.
cozy, and if you want to feel at home there, and then you're like, if your nest is the reality we're in, and you have an experience of seeing an owl in a trail and then being vaulted into a different dimension, your paradigm is shattered. And that's
Right.
something I say, like, so the people who have had these experiences, even seeing a UFO in the nighttime sky, like a thoughtful, some people can say, oh yeah, it's a little dot in the sky, isn't that interesting? But then there's more powerful sightings, and certainly the contact experiences where
Right.
from that point on, I mean, it's interesting. The New York Times has articles about UFOs, but wow, they do not, they just barely hint at the possibility that there's been contact.
Mhm.
And there's an author, one of the guys, Ralph Blumenthal, who wrote along with Leslie Kean, and I can't remember the other woman's name. There was
Hmm.
3 people who wrote the initial articles for the New York Times about the UFO experience back in 2017, and then there's been a handful of articles since then, and Ralph Blumenthal wrote an article for the New York Times where he interviewed people who claimed the contact experience. The New York Times chose not to report it, not to publish it, and it was published in the debrief. And it was, I think he interviewed like 5 or 6 experiencers. And so, which I that's fine, right? It's kind of outside the boundaries of their
Yeah.
readership and their
Yeah.
editorial comfort zone. I get
Mhm.
that. And so, but he went ahead and published it in like an independent online source. So the people who've had these experiences, and you can tell. I mean, you must know what I'm talking about, where you meet the people, and you can just kind of tell that they're like, ooh, they're not like. There's the club of, I guess this is a Karis Melina Brown used this term, and it's a term from, I mean, the Muggles, right, from Harry Potter. That's like the normal people that aren't indoctrinated into the
Yeah.
mystery school,
Yeah.
or the Muggles. And so that's a little bit derogatory, but it feels like, well, I'll tell you what it feels like. I've been to UFO conferences, and I walk in and I realize, like, I am in my tribe. I can
Mhm.
let down that kind of like, here, before I tell you this story, let me give you some disclaimers. You did it too. You just did it. Earlier you said, oh, just don't you
I do.
trust me? I'm a
You're
girl. I'm in
right.
my pajamas. And like, and
Right.
so like you don't need to do that when you're in your tribe. You
Right.
can just
Yeah, I
speak
agree.
freely. Oh, it's such a powerful experience. People say, why do you go to so many UFO conferences? And I'm like,
Ooh, are
oh,
you
I can
there?
just, oh, I'm here. Did you lose my audio?
Oh, it was so strange. Yeah.
Oh, did I
You,
touch my microphone or something? Or,
I no, the whole camera went blurry and
oh,
weird, and your voice like had an electronic trail off when you were
so,
talking about your tribe. That was interesting.
oh, okay. I didn't see it.
And the last
I
time,
didn't notice anything. So, but,
yeah, and remember the last time I got a knock in a
oh, that's
massive
right.
knock.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it seems like every time we're connecting, there seems to be something or someone going on.
And I heard that knock. You sent me the little clip afterwards, and I
Yeah,
heard it clearly. I did not hear it at all. I think I was talking.
you were talking at the time. Yeah, so
Yeah.
both of these have been when you're talking. That's really interesting to me. And a lot of people have been reporting major technological and electronic glitches and voice anomalies and whatnot when doing interviews with me. So I think it's fascinating. This is like the 6th or 7th example of that. That's fascinating
Yeah.
to me. Yeah. But I do agree entirely with what you're saying. And I try to choose my words so carefully to cater to um, the human social experience and the human ego, the human emotional experience, which is why I put that disclaimer up. And like what you were saying with the whole muggle terminology, I don't take offense to that at all because in my brain, I'm just going off of literal words. There's little or no emotional context for me. So you saying muggle, listening to what that was just literally from the Harry Potter series, it's just a non magical person. And so if we're taking that type of literal context and applying it to muggle for this situation, I completely agree with you.
And there are people in this phenomenon who would not call it magical event. I mean, I there are some people who are suffering from dark, traumatic, difficult experiences, and I've heard researchers and I've heard people in the field say, like, oh, their vibrations aren't raised enough, and they bring a negative energy, and a negative experience is reflected back. Like, wow, that's like blaming the victim. Yeah, I'm not so. And
Well,
I
I do kind
go
of
on.
agree. I'm sorry, hon. I do actually kind of agree. In my experience, low, like so-called low vibration, i.e., really physically and emotionally unhealthy people and people who are dealing with chemical addictions and who are abusive and whatnot. That's what I call low vibration. People who don't take good care of their bodies, their homes, their pets, etc. That's low vibration. And I do agree actually that it does draw in negative non-human experiences, to be honest with you. But we may just, I know that it's not exactly emotionally a nice sentiment for most human people to connect with, but that has been my experience and my understanding after working dozens of cases professionally. But of course, what do you think about that? How do you feel about all of that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I just so I'm very empathic, and I can when I talk to people, like I get drawn right into their story. So that's an
Ah,
example of
okay.
being at a UFO conference, right? So I talk to someone, and they say, "Oh, like basically, I saw like a ball of light in my backyard, and these beings emerged, and I just felt they were my soul family, and I like connected with like the magnificence of the universe, and I was engulfed in this radiant feeling of connection and all knowing." And I'm like, oh, I can totally feel that. And I talked to the next person at the conference, and hey, what brings you here? And say, oh, I was in my backyard, and this ball of light came through, and these beings came out, and I was suddenly like thrust into this place of like absolute terror and horror, and I felt like I was being like, mind manipulated, and it was traumatic, and I was and oftentimes parents with their kids are involved. That's a really tough thing for parents. That's actually the hardest thing. And I empathize completely with those people too. I totally feel it. I totally feel the empathy of their, like, I feel their emotions. I feel their trauma, and it's it's this two sides of the same coin in a way.
Uh-huh.
And so I got to be really careful not to, um like, I know what I want, right? Like I would love it to be all benevolent and ascended masters coming here to earth to help humanity rise up and meet the challenges of this modern existence. Like, wow, wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah.
I could cherry pick the data out of the big pool of UFO reports. I could cherry pick stories and I could argue the point, but in doing so, I would have to ignore other pieces. We talked a little bit about Ray Hernandez over the he's involved in an organization. It used to be called FREE, FREE. It had an acronym.
I did hear about that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And now that it's called the Edgar Mitchell Society for Non-Ordinary Experience or something like that. But and so
Right.
Edgar Mitchell was the one of the guys that walked on the moon. He was an
Mhm.
astronaut, one of the 16 or 12 people that have actually stood on the moon. And he died probably 4 years ago or so. Um, the and Ray Hernandez was good friends with Edgar Mitchell. Now Edgar Mitchell did a statistical analysis of people who claim the contact experience, like a big data pool, like 3,000 people. I'm making that up, but it's more than 2,000. And all these little things came up. One of the things that came up, and to do with these things, you ask the same question a couple different ways. You do to a
Yes.
big data pool, you crunch numbers, and you get like a. So I feel it's legitimate. It's people say, oh, people, you bring to your research what you want. This is retired Harvard statisticians. So I think it's a pretty grounded set of research. But here's what came out, and I'm doing this roughly off the top of my head. It's about a 60-40 or 25-75 ratio, where 75% of the people between, let's say roughly three-quarters of the people who report UFO contact tell of benevolent, positive experiences.
Mhm.
They ask the question, would you want these experiences to stop? Approximately, I can't do these numbers off the top of my head, approximately 75% of the people surveyed said, no, I would not want these experiences stopped. On the flip side, about 25% or 35 or somewhere in there say, these experiences are dark. These experiences are challenging. These experiences, I don't like them. I want them to stop.
Mhm. Right.
So in order to that's interesting because if you watched late night TV documentaries, you know, about the UFO contact experience, it's all full of like reenactments of people, you know, on tables with medical exams and which is
Yeah.
part of the
Yeah.
phenomena. Uh and then the statisticians were wise enough to point out in their data that oftentimes the people who were having the negative experiences were saying these experiences are frightening, these experiences trouble me, I don't understand these experiences. So they were, you know, fear would be reflected as bad,
Mhm.
and then so it's a but that's a really interesting statistic because that is not, if you went to the parking lot at the shopping mall and asked people, you know, what's, you know, is UFO abduction good or bad? They'd say, oh, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad. But
Yeah.
that's not the people who are having the experience are reporting.
Yeah.
Statistically, it's about 60-75% are saying it seems to have a benevolent aspect to it. It's not my
Yes.
research, so I'm doing this off the cuff, having talked with Ray and seen some of his presentations
Oh,
and
sure.
looked at his writings. Yeah.
Sure. Well, firstly, I would like to say that I love talking to you because you and I come from completely different sides of the emotional coin. So for yourself, you are greatly immersed in your own life story in a lot of ways, in my understanding, and you are very emotionally empathic. And I love that about you because it gives me insight that I don't have. I'm not emotionally empathic because I don't have personally a ton of emotion. And I do make it a point to explain to people that what I put on my show, although I am a very happy person in general, I amp it up so that it comes across as being more vibrant and more inviting. But the person that I present, who I am on my core content on my channel, where I'm making the episodes from scratch, that's a lot more me.
Mm-hmm.
So I love seeing and understanding people who have that opposite of me because it really does help me grow. All of that being said, I do have a lot of energetic, you could say, empathy, as in I do feel a lot of energy and whatnot, but it's a completely different experience from what you are explaining. So
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate what you bring to the table, is what I'm trying to say. And beyond that, um, all of the cases that I've worked where there have been negative non-human experiences, where I have heard the side of the story from the human people, and then I've worked with the non-human people to pick their brains and understand what's going on. The non-human people have told me flat out that they pose as whatever is going to get the desired result from the human people. So a lot of the time, I really have come to the conclusion that the non-human people who are there to get the energetic food off of the human people are there, and that they pose as sometimes, yes, aliens or whatever the case may be. So I'm thinking that at least a good portion of that sample size may be, instead of working with actual, actual quote unquote aliens or fairies, they have a haunting by non-human energetic empath feeders. That's my understanding, who take on whatever mask or role is necessary in order to eat, essentially. So yeah, that's just my understanding. But what do you think about that
Well,
possibility?
Certainly heard the energy vampire aspect of the lore. I've found very if the evident the files that I'm receiving, it feels like I found very little of that in my files. I've certainly talked to people out there who I feel like I'm so subjective in my research and just focused on this little thread that it's not really showing up but I've in my research in the files that arrive. I'm like, the people ask me, how do you do your research? And I say, oh, I get up in the morning and I open my email inbox. That's how I do my
Yeah. Oh,
research.
yeah.
So so I don't have a broad spectrum of what may or may not be going on in the bigger data pool, but I know that there's those accounts out there where people feel like their energy is being harvested the same way we would harvest, you know, corn in a cornfield in a way, you know, for sustenance,
Right.
or
Right.
more, maybe more correctly, like an addictive drug. You know, the way we would seek an addictive drug is the way that some of these beings are seeking out this contact event.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, there's like this theater aspect interwoven into the mystery. And so the mystery, I'm sure I said this before, like I look at the mystery the same way that a someone who does dream analysis would look at the mystery. And so if like someone tells me a real life story, I would analyze it like I was analyzing a dream. Because these beings, just what you said, they appear to what we want them to be, you know. So sometimes it's very manipulative. Like they'll show up. Oh, one woman told a story of the beings, gray beings. She's vacuuming the house. Gray beings enter the house and she's vacuuming. She totally freaks out. And all of a sudden the gray beings are gone. And the door opens up and her husband runs in. She said, honey, what's great? Are you okay? And she like is totally relieved her husband's there. And then she realized like her husband's not there at all. This is a complete psychic projection. And so then she's thrust into this other, like, you know, what is really happening. Those beings obviously could just go into her mind, pick out the imagery that was needed, the same way that we can go onto the hard drive
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
click one button and the file comes up. They can do it instantaneously. And so it makes the research really messy when the subject you're researching has the ability to interact with the observer's mind and create things that aren't necessarily there. On a very simple way, the 4-foot tall owl in the road seems to be, by all accounts, a gray alien in the road, a gray being with the big black eyes and the bald head that is somehow using a psychic projection on the observer. So right from there, you hear the story of, and I'm not joking, I say like, oh, I've heard that story 500 times. I don't have a number, but that's pretty
It's
close.
there for a reason. It's a trope for a reason.
Yeah. And sometimes it's deer, and sometimes it's raccoons, and sometimes it's firemen, and sometimes it's, you know,
Yeah.
like Jesus or
Yes.
clowns, you know, like
Yeah.
there's, it gets weird. Yeah.
It
So
does. It does.
little,
What I've been taught about all of this is that every energetic empath, whether that person is technically human, fairy, alien, angel, demon, hybrid, or something more exotic, is actually an empathic or an energetic vampire, that it is part of the biology. And so this doesn't necessarily make them so-called good or evil or bad or anything like that. It just means that this is their biology and they have to do certain things to survive. And just like human people who eat shrimp and fish and beef and all of that. So for me, it's rather an amoral subject. But what I do find interesting too is that I have run into non-human people who go well beyond just getting their biological needs met. There are some out there who will take a personal vendetta against certain human beings and make it their mission to harvest as much energy from that person. So, um, again, this is just how I understand it. Human people are very, very emotional. And a lot of my work with human people has been to help them tamp down that emotion so that they can strategically change their lives and resolve whatever
mhm.
paranormal issues are going on. And most human people that I tried to help, they could not do it. And this is why I retired. But so human people put out an energetic field that is fueled by their physical health, their thought patterns, beliefs, and their feelings. All of this adds up to the auric field around the body. And the energetic empaths who do have to feed off of that, they will sip off of the auric field, depending upon what type of fuel or food that they need
from human people. So there are some that are very benevolent towards human people, and they will mask as performers or as sometimes public figures, celebrities. And that's how they get their energetic needs met, by entertaining human people and interacting with them and sipping off of the joy that human people put out, the joy and the excitement. Then we have the other side of the coin where they will torment human people and that then they will sip off of that. And usually the ones who are acting, in my opinion, morally, they don't do it long term with like one victim. They'll show up and maybe enhance one or two scary events in that person's life, or they don't even have to do that. Some of them, they just sip off of it and then they leave. But then we have ones who are, again, they take out like a personal vendetta against certain human people, and they will go far beyond sucking off of the emotional auric field that's being put out. They will drain human life force directly. So, you know how people say we have the aura outside of our body, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so my understanding and experience is that each person inside the body has a certain amount of life force, and that there are certain non-human energetic empaths or energetic vampires who can draw out that life force. So we have some of like the fairies and the aliens, etc., who can take a human person out of the consciousness, out of the body, and reassign them to a different reality.
Mm-hmm.
These kinds of people can draw out the life force and kill a person, a human person. And typically they don't tend, in my experience, to prey on human people who are living what you could call a really high vibration life, that they're doing meaningful, thoughtful charity work. They're good, kind, loving people, but they're grounded and they're logical and they're not too terribly emotional. They go for the ones who are living hypocritical lives, who have drug addictions, they're abusive people,
Mm-hmm.
they're nasty people, but they do absolutely target them and suck out that life force. And so this is why we have the stories of, at least in the olden days, people meeting or having a bad encounter with like a fairy, and then they slowly die over the next hours, days, weeks, months. That's my understanding anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I just think of like the tradition of demonic possession within the Catholic Church. I mean, there's
Mm-hmm.
demonic possession that shows up in other forms too. It seems the Catholic Church is addressing it in a way that no other institution in the West really is. I'm sure there's like shamans in Africa that would address it in their own cultural
Yeah.
way. But so yeah, so there's issues of and people will say entity possession or demonic possession, or there's all kinds of vocabulary words you could use. And I've read enough. Oh, there's a character, a man named Paul Eno, who was a
Writing team with me.
pardon.
He's on the writing team with me.
Oh, Paul Eno is a wonderful guy. Yeah, great, really
Yeah.
thoughtful, really clear thinker on these subjects. Yeah, yeah. And so he started off in the Catholic Church working with the exorcist. Yeah. So this is we're dealing with a genuine mystery. And as I say, like there's like, the Venn diagrams where the two circles, they overlap.
Yes.
And then you can put a third circle and it overlaps. That little point where it overlaps is where the interest is. Each
Yeah.
circle might have its own characteristics. The fairies may have certain characteristics. The
Yes.
aliens may have certain characteristics. The spirit animals of a of a native in South Dakota might have their own circle with all their characteristics and a mood. But somehow there's some core thing where they all connect in there. And
Yeah. Yes, I agree. And that reminds me, so I have done ayahuasca before in a sacred ceremony. I loved it. I had a blast. Uh, my husband, not quite so much, but after the fact, he and I were asked to join the staff team, and we did for a while. And so we were working as counselors at this sacred retreat. And something that kept coming up during a lot of these people's experiences after the morning after, when they would be able to talk about everything that happened, owls kept coming up.
oh, really? In ayahuasca?
in ayahuasca. Yes.
Yes.
And so ayahuasca is called, well, in the original language, vine of the dead is what it
Hmm.
means. And owls being linked to death and transformation and interdimensionality was really
And
fascinating.
psychedelics.
And psychedelics, yeah. But ayahuasca, it was they were incredibly present in many of the stories that I heard. I didn't experience owls personally, but a lot of people did. A lot of people did, and they said that owls were acting as their guides, or if not that, that they played a very significant role in their ayahuasca experiences.
So, what's the difference between an insurance salesman in Ohio who gets picked up on the side of the road by a flying saucer, has a transformative experience, and comes back? He might have seen an owl. Let's say he has an owl in a UFO experience. I'm making this up, but he
Oh,
is
okay.
transported to a different realm, right? So he's on board the craft. Time doesn't work the same. Something is totally different.
Mhm.
There's, the people describe these issues on board the craft. And that are dreamlike, but not a dream. They're
Yeah.
more real than, this is very common. People say, I was on board the craft. It was more real than real.
Yes. And people with ayahuasca experiences have said the same thing. And even me, that was my experience.
It's the people who have the near-death experience say that too. It was more
Yeah.
real than real.
Yeah.
Like where they'll literally say that the experience, I'm paraphrasing and kind of,
Hmm.
the experience on board the craft was the true reality.
Yes.
What we're experiencing now is the flat two-dimensional reality, like the movie screen.
Right.
Like it doesn't have the same depth.
Right. I
It's
agree.
it's a rich experience, but it doesn't have the same depth. When you're on board the craft, you have that richer depth. I'm paraphrasing and glomming together a bunch of things, but that's sort of an amalgamation of like the
Right.
reports I've heard. Um, so this is interesting. I don't have anything in my files of people taking ayahuasca and seeing owls. I'm certain it happens, right? So people take
Oh,
ayahuasca all the time, and I haven't dug into the ayahuasca research much. I've done a little bit. I read what's the spirit molecule? I can't remember the doctor who wrote that, the guy from the
yes.
University of New
I
Mexico.
know what you're talking about. Good book.
Yeah, DMT, the spirit molecule. I read that. So but so this is interesting. It makes sense. It should, given the construct
Yes.
of the research I've done. It's like, well, it shouldn't be all over that. I do have one wonderful story of a person going to an ayahuasca retreat, and they thought it was just going to be like, hey, well, this is the introduction. We're going to talk about the issues and everything. I was like, oh, they went there and they were like they were like drank the brew, and
Yeah.
so but they had a they were like driving. There was in California and they were driving, so they stopped to get coffee, and they're in the coffee shop, and it's like kind of got like a little outside deck, and there's a wall that's like in a little town, and they're facing this wall drinking the coffee on the way to the ayahuasca retreat.
Oh
And
boy.
they're like, what is that? What is something in that? There's a hole in that brick wall, right? So they're like in a, like
Uh-huh.
there's a little cafe that's kind of facing a wall in like a little street, and there was a little owl sitting asleep in a
Oh.
hole on a building, which is how, let's say, a screech owl, a western
Yeah.
screech owl, they
Yeah.
sit really still. That's their defense mechanism. They choose to hang out where they're camouflaged. Owls look like tree bark. That's why they have that speckly quality to their. So there it was like speckly, and in the and I was like, oh my gosh, that's. So they saw a little owl on the way to an ayahuasca retreat, which they didn't expect, and and I think if I'm remembering the story correctly, they were like they had a really rich big experience, and then they were kind of asked to return and come into the tribe. I'm this is I get so many letters, but that's the gist of it.
Yeah.
They were
Yeah.
asked
Into
to
the
come back,
tribe
and they
of
asked
the
to.
family.
Yeah.
Hmm. Excellent.
So yeah, so what's the difference between the person who gets abducted by a UFO, taken to a different reality, comes back and sees the world differently? What's the difference between then and a guy who sits in a circle in the jungles of Peru, drinks ayahuasca, barfs, and then like wakes up the next morning and go, ooh, wow, I had this trippy experience, and then goes back home and changes his life. So
Right.
they,
And
they
interestingly, you glitched out again there in the same exact way. It seems like when you're talking about the specific details of interdimensionality, you're starting to glitch out, but it's not disappearing, or you're not glitching out so badly that I can't understand what you're saying. It's
Mhm.
really interesting because I've never had this type of glitching
Oh wow.
ever. And you even are the time that we've spent together, you've never had this type of glitching. Actually, in fact, there's been no glitching until this show. So I find that very interesting and
Wow.
pointed. Yes. But I agree with exactly what you're saying. And I do think too that these are interdimensionally transformative experiences, as in these people are going to these ayahuasca retreats or events in living one reality. And then they have often, like you said, seeing the owl on the way there. That right there may well have been a catalyst to change their dimension, aka reality. And then they're having another reality changing event, and then they come out living a completely different life and maybe a completely different vibration. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Spiritual awakening, whatever term you want to use. The transformative experience. So
indeed.
there's those five things. You can be transformed by those five things. UFO contact will transform you. Death is the ultimate
Yes,
transformation. So if your parent dies or if someone close to you dies, you are forced to
yes.
look at in your own mortality and the transformational process that awaits all of us. So yeah, it's a rich, like it's I've said this before. Uh, you get two thoughtful people talking about UFOs. I suspect two thoughtful people talking about ayahuasca, two thoughtful people talking about shamanic initiation, two thoughtful people talking about death. You get two people talking about these big, big issues. If in 3 minutes they don't go to who are we, why are we here, what does it mean? If they don't go right there, they're missing the bigger issue, right? So if they're sitting there talking about the government documents and like who was at this meeting and this witness testimony from Area 51, if they're getting all lost in that, like I'm like bored. Like I don't want to be in that conversation. I guess I'm sure it's very interesting. I'm sure there's kernels of truth in those issues, but my like Karis Melina Brown, the owl says, she asks the owl, are you a fairy? And the owl says, like, or are you an alien or a fairy? And the owl says, why can't I be both? You're both. Like that's the playful, rich dream
Exactly.
logic that I just yearn for in this mystery. That
Oh,
that
yes, I agree. And and two, that's precisely what I hope to bring to the world is that dreaminess and that playfulness and some of that mystery while maybe providing some exotic answers. Maybe, just maybe. And
mhm.
with that, my friends, we have come full
Oh my,
circle and we are out of time.
wow, it feels like we just barely got started.
I know. My phone vibrated here on my lap to let me know that it is wrap up time. Sadly, however, for anyone who would like to get more of Mike Clelland and the Weird Walk Home, he will, as far as I know, absolutely be returning. Is that right?
Sure, anytime, yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. And January is Owl Month, so I'm going to be recording a review for The Messengers by Mr. Mike Clelland.
Good. Okay. So yeah, great. So if people want to get a hold of me, you can Google UFO owls. I come right up. I'm the top of the list. You could go to mikeclelland.com, Clelland, Mike Clelland, all one word. And from that spot, there's a contact form if you want to reach out to me. And from that spot, you can access my blog, my books, my podcasts, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So
Absolute perfection, my love. Everyone, until next time, I have been Tillie Treadwell. This has been Mike Clelland, and we wish you all a very merry morning or a magical midnight.